Before we begin the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us where you watched it in the comments. The sun hung low over the valley, throwing long strips of light across the dry grass as Elias Ward guided his horse along the abandoned cattle trail. The heat clung to his skin, heavy enough to slow every breath. He had been riding since early morning, checking fences and following the tracks of two cattle that had wandered off during the night. It was routine work, but necessary. He lived alone, and the land didn't give second chances to anyone careless. Elias was a man shaped by silence. In his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, he carried the look of someone who no longer expected much from the world. Years ago, he had lived on this same land with a family he thought he would grow old with. A raid changed all of that. His wife and daughter were gone, taken in a single night that he rarely allowed himself to remember. Since then, his life had been stripped down to necessity. Keep the ranch alive, keep himself alive, avoid anything that stirred the past. He nudged the horse forward, scanning the trail automatically. That was when he saw it, an uneven shape lying near the edge of the path. At first, it looked like a bundle of cloth or an injured animal. But as he drew closer, his posture straightened. It was a woman. Elias dismounted immediately, boots hitting the dirt with a dull thud. He approached cautiously, hand hovering near his revolver. The valley was full of outlaws, drifters, and desperate people. He had learned not to trust anything too quickly. But as soon as he reached her side, caution shifted to concern. She was young. Apache. Her skin was flushed from heat, her clothing torn, her arms covered in bruises. Rope burns marked her wrists. Her breathing was shallow, barely holding on. Elias knelt beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. She whispered one word. Hoarse cracked. "Water." He uncapped his canteen and held it to her lips. She managed only a few weak swallows before her head fell back against his hand. Her body trembled with exhaustion. He scanned the ground quickly. There were tracks, 3 horses moving fast, drag marks, signs of pursuit. Whoever had done this to her was still out there. A part of him tightened with instinct. Trouble was close. But walking away wasn't an option. Not after what he saw. He lifted her carefully into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body limp with dehydration. As he placed her in front of the saddle, she murmured something in Apache, too faint to understand, then went still again. The ride back to the cabin was slow and tense. Elias kept one arm around her so she wouldn't fall, feeling the uneven rise and fall of her breathing. Each time her head slid, he steadied it gently. She was unconscious most of the way. By the time he reached the cabin, a weathered structure built of thick timber and years of stubborn effort, the sun had already dipped toward the ridge. He carried her inside, pushing the door open with his shoulder, and laid her on his bed. He lit the oil lamp, spreading warm light across the small room. Inside, the familiar scent of wood smoke and dry earth grounded him. But the sight of her injuries twisted something in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Bruises along her ribs, dried blood near her hairline, skin burning hot with fever. He soaked a cloth in cool water and pressed it gently against her forehead. Her eyes opened halfway, dark, unfocused, afraid. Her gaze darted around the room, landing on him with immediate tension. "It's all right," Elias said softly. "You're safe here." She didn't speak, but she didn't pull away either. Her eyes moved to her belongings placed neatly beside the bed, her weapons untouched. Her breathing eased slightly at the sight. He offered her a sip of water. She swallowed with effort, watching his face for any sign of threat. Elias stepped back once she finished, giving her space to settle. "Rest," he said. "You're hurt. I'll keep watch." Her eyelids lowered slowly, exhaustion dragging her back under. Before sleep took her, she whispered something he caught this time. "My name, Ayoka." Elias nodded once. "You're safe, Ayoka." When she finally slept, Elias pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. He kept his rifle within reach, listening to the quiet sounds of the valley outside. He didn't know why she'd been chased or how far behind her the danger was, but he knew one thing clearly. He wasn't letting anything happen to her tonight. For the first time in a long while, the cabin held more than silence. It held a stranger fighting for her life, and a man who had forgotten how it felt to care, whether someone lived or died. The long night began with Elias sitting guard, watching the slow, fragile rise of Ayoka's breath in the lamplight. A thin line of morning light slipped through the cracks in the cabin wall, settling across the wooden floor and creeping slowly toward the bed where Ayoka lay. Her breathing had steadied through the night, no longer shallow and broken, and the fever that clung to her skin had eased under the cool cloth Elias exchanged again and again until dawn. Elias stood near the doorway, rubbing the stiffness from his shoulders after hours of keeping watch. He hadn't meant to stay awake, but every time he closed his eyes, the thought of bounty hunters riding through the dark pushed him back to alertness. He checked the valley twice, once at midnight, once again closer to morning. Nothing stirred. No tracks, no distant torches, no sound besides the quiet rustle of early wind pushing through dry grass. When Ayoka's eyes finally opened, they moved slowly, first to the low ceiling above her, then to the small table beside the bed, and finally to Elias. For a moment, confusion crossed her face, followed by tension. Her hand edged toward her hip out of instinct until she saw her belongings stacked neatly within reach. Elias stepped forward but kept his voice steady and low. "You're safe." No one followed. Ayoka's fingers relaxed. She blinked several times, as if replaying the last things she remembered: the trail, the heat, collapsing, waking in a stranger's bed. Her voice came out rough. "Where am I?" "My cabin," Elias answered. "You were unconscious when I found you. Why did you help me?" Her tone wasn't suspicious, only tired, exhausted from too much pain and too many days surviving on fear alone. "You needed it," Elias said plainly. "Didn't seem right to leave you there." Ayoka absorbed that answer carefully, watching his posture, his hands, the distance he kept. He wasn't hovering, wasn't crowding her, wasn't asking for anything. She was used to men who looked too long or spoke too loud. Elias was neither. She pushed herself up slowly. Pain tightened her jaw, but she didn't complain. Elias reached out automatically to steady her, then paused, waiting for her permission. She nodded once, allowing the support. His hand moved her back, gentle, sure, guiding her upright. Her voice came softer this time. "My name is Ayoka." "Elias Ward," he replied. "You remember what happened?" She took a long breath, steadying herself before speaking. "I ran. They chased me. They were close." "Who?" Elias asked, not pressing, just trying to understand what danger he had brought into his cabin. Ayoka's gaze lowered to her bruised wrists. "Bounty hunters." Elias had suspected as much, but now he understood the rope burns, the bruises, the way she collapsed from exhaustion rather than injury alone. He waited, giving her time. She wasn't someone who would open her full story easily, and he respected that. "They wanted to take me back," she continued. "Alive, if possible. Dead, if not." Elias nodded once. The missing questions from the first night became clearer. Why she was alone, why she was chased so far into settler land, why she looked like she had fought until her body failed. Her explanation filled the gaps without dragging her deeper into memories she wasn't ready to relive. He set a bowl of warm broth beside her. "You should eat something. Your body needs it." Ayoka stared at the bowl for a moment before taking it in both hands. The warmth traveled through her fingers into her arms, easing some of the tension from her shoulders. She drank slowly, focusing on each swallow. Elias watched her carefully, not in a way that made her uneasy, but in a way that let her know he was ready to help the moment she needed it. His quiet attention told her more than words could. After a few minutes, she set the bowl down and looked toward the window. "Did you see any tracks?" "I checked before dawn," Elias replied. "Nothing fresh. Whoever chased you kept moving." Ayoka let out a breath she had been holding since she woke. It didn't erase her fear entirely, but gave her enough space to think past immediate survival. She glanced around the cabin, taking in the details she was too weak to notice the night before. The worn timber walls, the simple tools hanging from nails, the coat draped over a hook near the door. Everything here was used, not displayed. This wasn't a place built for guests. "Do you live alone?" she asked. Elias's expression shifted, barely noticeable. "Yes. For long. A while." She sensed the weight behind those short answers, the kind of history that wasn't shared freely. She didn't ask more. She understood what it meant to carry something you didn't want to open. Ayoka slipped her injured arm across her ribs and tried to piece together her surroundings. Your cabin, it's far from the town. By design, Elias said. Quiet out here. Fewer problems. You thought I'd bring trouble, she said, not accusing, simply acknowledging reality. I thought you were in danger, he corrected. That's enough. Something steadied in her expression. She wasn't used to someone separating her from the danger around her. Most people saw the chaos, not the person inside it. A moment of silence passed, calm, not tense. Ayoka's voice softened. Thank you for carrying me. You're welcome. She shifted her weight and drew a slow breath, trying her strength. Elias moved closer again, ready to catch her if she slipped, but she held steady. Her ribs ached sharply, but she forced herself to stay upright. You shouldn't push yourself yet, Elias murmured. I need to understand where I am, she said. And what happens next? Next, Elias replied, you rest, eat, heal. And after that, he hesitated before answering, measuring his words in the quiet way he always did. We figure out what you need. When you're strong enough to decide that for yourself. Ayoka studied him with a careful, searching gaze, recognizing the difference between someone offering safety and someone offering control. Elias offered the first without even thinking about the second. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. I don't trust people easily. You don't have to trust me yet, he said. Just breathe. That's enough for now. The calm in his tone settled something in her that had been clenched tight for days. Ayoka leaned back, allowing fatigue to wash over her again, but this time without fear. Elias adjusted the blanket around her, checked the door one more time, then pulled the chair beside the bed. He didn't speak further. She didn't need him to. The cabin fell into a quiet rhythm. Her slow breaths, his steady presence, and the fragile beginning of something neither of them knew how to name yet. The danger behind her hadn't disappeared, but for the first time in days, Ayoka felt the ground beneath her stop shaking. Elias stood watch, and she allowed herself to rest, not out of weakness, but because she finally felt she could. The morning stretched into a quiet midday, the kind of stillness that settled only in deep valleys far from towns and trails. Ayoka sat propped against the wall near the bed, her breathing calmer, her eyes focused on the small window where sunlight touched the edges of the room. Elias moved around the cabin with a steady rhythm, checking the stove, securing the shutters, sorting tools near the door. His movements were controlled, deliberate, never sudden. Every choice he made seemed aimed at keeping the space calm for her. Ayoka studied him between breaths. She wasn't used to silence that wasn't hostile. For days she had survived on instinct, running, hiding, anticipating danger. Her mind had been stuck in survival mode for so long that the sudden absence of threat left her uneasy. Elias caught her watching and stopped near the table. You need anything? He asked. She shook her head, just trying to understand what comes next. Elias lowered himself into the chair beside her, arms resting on his knees. He didn't look away or avoid her eyes. Nothing happens until you're strong enough to walk without pain. After that, you decide. Ayoka appreciated that answer, but something deeper pressed against her ribs, a question she had carried since the trail. When you found me, were you heading somewhere important? No, Elias said, just tending this land, checking fences, making sure the cattle stayed within the valley. You do all that alone? I have for years. She hesitated before asking, why stay here? There are safer places, places with people. Elias's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't shift or look away, but something in the air changed, an old wound touched without meaning to. After a few seconds, he answered in a low, even voice. My family lived here, my wife and my little girl. After the raid, after the fire, I rebuilt what I could. It's what I had left. Ayoka lowered her gaze, not out of pity, but out of recognition. She knew loss when she saw it. She had been living with it since the day her husband died and her sister vanished. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Elias nodded once, accepting the sincerity without needing more words. She lifted her eyes again. You said the hunters didn't pass by last night. No fresh tracks, Elias said. But men like that don't give up easily. Ayoka took in a deep breath, steady but heavy. Her ribs throbbed, but this pain was familiar now. They were hired, not just by one clan, by more than one group who wanted to silence anyone tied to my husband's family. Elias listened closely, letting her speak at her own pace. My husband tried to stop a fight between clans. He believed there could be peace with settlers, trade, cooperation. Some people didn't want that. They blamed him when tensions grew worse. After he died, someone paid outsiders to find me. They said I knew too much. She swallowed hard. I don't. I just know they feared what I might learn. This was the part she hadn't said earlier. The reason the hunters chased her into settled land. Why they refused to stop. Why they tied her rather than kill her outright. It filled in the missing pieces without forcing her to relive more than she needed to. Elias leaned back slightly. Then staying out here was the right choice. They'll have trouble finding you again. Ayoka managed a faint, tired smile. You believe that? I know these hills, he said, and I know how men think when money leads them. They expect fear. They expect you to run again. I'm done running. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a certainty Elias respected. He stood and moved toward the window, scanning the ridge out of habit. You'll get your strength back. When you do, you'll be able to choose where you go. If you want to search for your sister, you won't do it alone. Ayoka blinked, momentarily taken aback. You'd help me? Yes. Why? The question wasn't accusatory. It was genuine, a question shaped by too many betrayals and too few reasons to trust. Elias kept his eyes on the valley as he answered. Because no one should face something like that without support, and because you were left to fend for yourself long enough. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She looked down, gripping the blanket with both hands, holding herself steady. People don't usually help for nothing. I don't want anything from you, he said. Not now, not later. The simplicity of his tone cut through the uncertainty she carried. She believed him, not all at once, but enough to feel the tension drop slightly from her shoulders. Ayoka pushed herself upright, testing her balance. Elias turned immediately, stepping closer but still giving her room. Take it slow. I need to move, she said. My body remembers fear too well. I need to teach it that I'm not trapped. Elias nodded once. Lean on the chair first. She placed a hand on the back of the chair and lifted herself to her feet. Pain shot through her ribs, but she steadied herself with a quiet breath. Elias stood within reach, ready if she faltered, but careful not to touch unless she asked. Her steps were small, stiff, but each one grounded her more firmly in the moment. She reached the cabin door and placed her hand against the frame. Sunlight spilled across her fingers. Warm, real, safe. She looked at the open land outside. Wide, quiet, untouched by the fear that had chased her for days. Her heartbeat loosened. Her lungs expanded more fully. Elias stepped to her side. You'll get stronger every day. Ayoka nodded. I already am. She wasn't running. She wasn't being dragged. She was standing inside this small cabin. For the first time since everything fell apart, she felt the beginnings of something steady, a place where she wasn't hunted, and a man who didn't ask anything in return. Elias watched her expression soften in the doorway, and for the first time in years, he felt the faintest shift in his own guarded heart. Something was changing between them. Not forced, not spoken, simply real. The afternoon light softened as the sun shifted behind the ridge, casting longer shadows across the clearing outside the cabin. Ayoka stood near the doorway, steadying herself with a hand on the frame while the wind moved gently across the valley. Each breath she took felt clearer than the one before. The ache in her ribs lingered, but it no longer controlled her. What she needed now was space to think, room to understand who she was becoming after days of running. Elias came back from the corral carrying a bucket of water, his shirt damp with sweat from repairing a broken section of fence. He stopped when he saw her standing, his brows tightening slightly in concern. You sure you should be up this long? I need the air, she said. My body remembers danger too well. I don't want it to mistake safety for weakness. Elias set the bucket down and stepped closer, but not close enough to crowd her. Then let's stay where you're steady. She nodded, appreciating that he didn't question her need to move. She had expected men in this land to take control, to speak over her, to tell her what she should feel or do. Elias did none of that. His silence gave her room to breathe. Ayoka watched him wipe his hands on a cloth and lean against the porch rail, eyes on the open valley. His posture held a quiet tension, a man used to standing guard even when no threat was visible. Was the fence bad? she asked. Worse than I thought, he said. Something spooked the cattle last night. Tracks were scattered. That's how I ended up out there, Ayoka murmured. The hunters fired and my horse panicked, threw me into the rocks. Her hand brushed a bruise along her side. Elias's attention sharpened. Your horse, did it run off injured? No, she said. She's strong. If she got away, she'll circle back to find me. She always does. Elias nodded. That small detail filled in one of the unspoken gaps in the story. How Ayoka survived long enough to reach the trail. How she covered so much ground alone. She wasn't without skill or experience. She wasn't helpless. She had simply run out of strength. They stepped inside as the wind grew colder. Elias lit the lamp, its warm glow pushing shadows across the room. Ayoka returned to the bed, sitting carefully. Elias poured her a cup of warm tea he'd made earlier from dried herbs. She accepted it slowly, fingertips brushing his for a moment before pulling away. You keep this place prepared, she said, like you expect something to happen. Habit, Elias replied. Living alone teaches you to stay ready. Ayoka studied him. You stayed awake most of the night. He didn't deny it. You were hurt, he said simply. Didn't want you waking up afraid. Her eyes softened with quiet gratitude. You said your wife and daughter lived here before the raid. Did you lose everything in one night? Elias's jaw set for a moment, the way it always did when he stood near the edge of memories he didn't revisit often. But he didn't shut down. Not this time. Ayoka had given parts of her story. He could offer something in return. They stayed behind when I went into town for supplies, he said quietly. I came home to smoke, saw their tracks leading toward the creek, found their clothes along the bank. His voice roughened but remained steady. Raiders didn't leave much to understand. Ayoka lowered her gaze, absorbing the pain beneath the plain words. And you rebuilt the cabin after that. It's all I could do, Elias answered. Grief needs work. Otherwise, it swallows you. Ayoka tightened her hand around the warm cup. I pushed my own grief away. Thought if I kept moving, I wouldn't break. How long have you been running? Since the day they killed my husband. She paused. Since my sister went missing. Elias pulled the chair closer and Saturday. You said before that they wanted to silence you. What do they think you knew? Ayoka hesitated, then gave the honest answer she had avoided earlier. They thought my husband told me the names of the men who paid the hunters. They thought he warned me before he died. But he didn't. I only know something is wrong between the clans, something planned, something tied to outsiders. This explained the hunter's determination. It answered the quiet question lingering since she appeared on the trail. Why would anyone chase one woman so far, risk so much, push so hard? Ayoka continued, voice low. I wasn't supposed to survive. That's why I can't go back until I find my sister. She might know something I don't. Elias considered her words carefully. When you're healed, we could go look for her. Ayoka looked up sharply. You do that? Yes. Why? His answer came without hesitation. Because no one should carry something like that alone. Her breath caught, not from pain, but from the quiet, unexpected truth in his voice. She held his gaze longer than before, finding no hidden motive behind it. Only sincerity. The air between them changed. Not romantic, not sudden, but deepening with trust neither had expected to form so quickly. A gust of wind hit the cabin wall, shaking loose dust from the rafters. Ayoka felt her ribs tighten with instinct. Elias noticed a shift in her breathing. You think they'll come tonight? He asked. They won't give up, she said. They think I know something worth killing for. Elias stood, checking the locks on the door. Then we make sure they regret coming here. Ayoka watched him move with calm precision, the kind of steadiness that anchored the fear rising in her chest. He wasn't afraid of the hunters, not because he underestimated them, but because he had already endured the worst a man could face. She set her empty cup aside. Elias, thank you. He turned toward her. For what? For not asking more than I can give. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried the truth. Elias nodded once, accepting her gratitude without needing anything behind it. Rest. I'll be right here. Ayoka laid back against the blanket, feeling her body loosen into the bed. Outside, the valley darkened, but inside the cabin the air held warmth. Warmth that came not from fire, but from safety earned through quiet trust. For the first time since the hunt began, she fell asleep without fear. Elias sat beside her, rifle by his chair, eyes trained on the door as the night settled around them. Their connection had begun quietly, but now it held shape, steady, fragile, and growing stronger with every breath. The wind picked up before sunrise, carrying a colder edge through the valley as Elias stepped outside with his rifle slung over his shoulder. He scanned the ridge, the tree line, the trail he'd ridden dozens of times, this time with a sharper, heavier caution. Ayoka's words from the night before stayed with him. The hunters wouldn't give up. Men who were paid to silence a truth didn't walk away after one failed attempt. Inside the cabin, Ayoka woke to the faint creak of the door and the smell of cold air drifting in. Her ribs still ached, but her strength had grown enough that she could sit up without help. She pushed the blanket aside and walked slowly toward the table, steadying herself with each step. She wasn't hiding anymore. She had survived too much to sit quietly while danger approached. Elias returned with damp boots and tense shoulders. When he saw her awake, he paused, studying her posture. "Sleep any." "Enough," she said. "What did you see?" Elias set the rifle against the wall. "Tracks. 3 horses. Passed through the far end of the valley before dawn." Ayoka's breath tightened. "They're close." "They didn't come to the door," Elias said. "But they're not far." This answered one of the lingering uncertainties, whether the hunters had lost her trail. They hadn't. They were searching the edges of the valley, waiting for an opening. Ayoka moved closer, her steps steady but cautious. They'll test the cabin before they attack. They watch first. They learn the land before moving in. Elias nodded. "I figured the same. That's why we need to make the cabin ready." Ayoka hesitated, holding her side. "I can help." "You shouldn't be lifting anything heavy," Elias replied. "I'm not asking to lift," she said. "I know how they think. If we don't prepare, they'll walk right through us." Elias looked at her for a long moment, measuring her resolve, her strength, her limits. Then he nodded. "Tell me what we need to change." They began with the windows. Elias moved crates and tools to create partial cover inside, places where they could fire without exposing themselves. Ayoka inspected the gaps in the shutters, showing him where hunters might aim if they try to shoot through the slats. This also clarified something unspoken. She wasn't just a survivor. She understood tactics, danger, and the patterns of men who hunted for pay. Elias paused as she pointed out a blind angle near the back wall. "You've done this before," he said. "I've been chased before," she answered. "You learn quickly when there's no one else to protect you." Her voice didn't shake. That alone told Elias how long she'd been fighting on her own. They reinforced the door next, sliding a heavy beam across it and adjusting the angle so it would hold against force. Elias hammered new nails into a loose board while Ayoka watched the trail through the narrow gap in the shutters. "They might try coming from the ridge," she said, "or circle behind the cabin." "That's where I'll be," Elias replied. "If they try anything." Her eyes softened with a mix of fear and gratitude she hadn't yet expressed openly. "I don't want you hurt because of me." "I'm not doing this because of you," Elias said. "I'm doing it because it's right." Ayoka looked away, unable to hide the flicker of emotion that crossed her face. She had spent months treated as a burden, a target, or a threat. Being treated as a person worth protecting felt almost unfamiliar. By midday, they had finished reinforcing the cabin. Elias stepped outside to check the ridge again, while Ayoka rested on the bed, running a hand over the new brace on the door. She studied the room, how he had given her space, how he had placed her belongings where she could reach them, how nothing in the cabin suggested she was a guest or an intruder. She realized something important. Elias wasn't simply helping her out of pity. He saw her. A sound outside snapped her attention back. Elias returning with a horse tied to a rope. Ayoka gasped softly. "That's my mare." The mare, a strong desert-bred Palomino, lifted her head at the sound of Ayoka's voice. She nudged forward, recognizing her owner even through the cabin door. Ayoka stepped outside, the cold biting at her skin, and touched the mare's mane with gentle hands. Elias gave her space while she inspected the horse, checking for cuts or injuries. The mare had a few scratches, but nothing serious. Relief washed over Ayoka's face, clear, deep, unguarded. "She followed my trail," Ayoka whispered. She always does. Good horse, Elias said. She stayed clear of trouble. This answered the quiet question that had lingered since chapter 1. How Ayoka had survived so long alone. Her horse hadn't abandoned her. She had simply lost her in the chaos of the attack. Ayoka stroked the mare's cheek. Thank you for finding her. I saw movement in the trees, Elias replied. Didn't know if it was danger or not. Turned out to be a smart animal waiting for the right moment. Ayoka guided the mare toward the shed, her steps more confident with each one. Elias walked beside her, keeping watch on the ridge. Together, they tethered the mare inside, out of sight. The sun lowered. The wind grew cold again. Ayoka and Elias stepped back into the cabin. The atmosphere had changed, not just because they were preparing for a fight, but because they were no longer strangers standing on opposite sides of their own grief. Ayoka sat on the bed, drawing slow breaths. Elias took the chair beside her, rifle resting against his knee. She watched him for a moment, her voice soft but steady. If they come tonight, she said, I won't be afraid. Elias looked at her, his expression calm but firm. You're not alone anymore. She held his gaze longer this time, the fear in her eyes replaced by trust slowly taking root. Outside, the valley darkened again as the first sounds of distant hooves drifted on the cold wind. Elias stood, loading his rifle with mechanical precision. Ayoka reached for her bow. The night ahead would test everything they'd built: courage, endurance, and the fragile bond forming between them. Stay close, Elias said. I will, she answered. And as the last line of sunlight disappeared behind the ridge, they stood together in the quiet cabin, no longer as two people with separate pasts, but as allies facing the same danger, side by side, ready for what was coming. Night returned without mercy. The cold crept in first, slipping between the trees along the ridge and settling over the valley like a warning. Elias kept the lantern low, its faint glow stretching only far enough to light the inside of the cabin. Ayoka sat near the bed with her bow across her knees, listening to every shift of wind and every scrape of branch outside. Her ribs hurt, but her breath stayed steady. She was no longer the woman who collapsed on the trail. She was alert, ready, and refusing to be prey again. Elias moved quietly around the cabin, checking each shutter and every angle they'd reinforced earlier. His steps were careful, his expression controlled. He'd spent too many nights facing danger alone. Tonight felt different. He wasn't protecting a stranger. He was standing beside someone who had fought her entire life to survive. The first sign of danger came as a faint tremor in the earth. Hoofbeats, distant but real. Ayoka looked toward the door. They're here. Elias grabbed his rifle and stepped away from the lantern's glow. Stay behind cover. We'll wait. The hoofbeats slowed, spreading out around the ridge. The hunters were dividing, searching for blind spots. Their movements were careful, not rushed. These were men who knew how to stalk prey, but Ayoka knew their patterns just as well. They'll test the back first, she whispered. One man watches the windows, the other tries to circle behind the shed. Elias nodded, positioning himself near the reinforced corner. I'll handle the back. You watch the left wall. If you see movement, call out. Ayoka drew an arrow and crouched behind the crates they had stacked earlier. Her heartbeat settled into a slow, controlled rhythm. The pain in her ribs sharpened when she moved, but she pushed it aside. Pain meant she was alive. Fear meant she needed to focus. A branch snapped somewhere near the shed. Elias shifted his stance, raising his rifle slightly. He waited, breath steady, listening as the footsteps crept closer. A shadow crossed the far edge of the window, tall, slow-moving, cautious. Not an animal. A man. Ayoka's voice came out low. Left side, someone's checking for openings. I see him, Elias whispered. The man raised his boot onto a crate outside the window, testing his reach. Ayoka leaned slightly, lined her arrow, and released. The shot was deliberate, not to kill, but to warn. The arrow struck the crate, inches from the man's foot. He stumbled back, surprised, and dropped into a crouch. Elias stepped forward and fired one clean shot into the dirt beside the man's hand. Leave while you can, he called out, voice calm but unwelcoming. Another voice answered from the ridge, sharp, angry, and familiar to Ayoka. You're protecting someone who doesn't belong to you. Ayoka stiffened at the sound. It was the hunter with the cold voice, the one who ordered her tied. She could almost see him in her memory, tall, pale-eyed, arrogant in his certainty that no one would stand between him and his reward. Elias didn't raise his voice. "This land isn't yours. Turn around." Silence followed for several seconds, long, dense, waiting to break. Then a rifle shot rang out from the ridge, slamming into the wooden beam beside the window. Splinters shot across the room. Ayoka dropped instinctively to the floor. Elias ducked low and moved toward the back corner, staying under the line of fire. "They're pushing from two sides," Ayoka whispered. "I know," Elias said. "Stay low." More hoofbeats approached from the rear. Elias slipped out of sight of the window, positioning himself behind the thicker timber near the back door. When the hunter rounded the shed, Elias fired a warning shot that ricocheted off a rock and sent the man scrambling back toward the trees. Ayoka leaned closer to the shutters, scanning the ridge through the narrow slits. "They're not sure how many people are inside. That's why they're not rushing." "Good," Elias replied. "Let them wonder." A moment later, the leader stepped into view, silhouetted against the moonlight. His rifle glinted. He aimed toward the cabin again. Ayoka felt a surge of heat rise under her ribs. Not fear, but anger. This man had chased her across miles of land, taken her freedom, stolen her peace. And now he threatened the one place she had felt safe in months. She steadied her breath, drew another arrow, and waited for the correct angle. The leader shouted, "Hand her over. Last chance." Ayoka stepped forward before Elias could stop her. "Come take me yourself." Her voice carried through the valley, steady, unbroken. The hunters froze. Elias turned to her sharply. "Ayoka!" She didn't look back. "He won't leave if I hide. He'll keep coming. He needs to see I'm not afraid anymore." Elias moved to her side, grounding her without touching her. "We end this together, not alone." She nodded once, accepting his support without losing her resolve. The leader fired another shot, this one hitting the frame of the door. Elias pulled Ayoka back behind cover, raising his rifle and firing a precise shot that shattered a rock beside the hunter's knee, forcing him to retreat. The valley finally fell silent. No more hoofbeats, no more voices, only the wind scraping across the grass. Ayoka leaned against the wall, catching her breath. "They didn't expect a fight. They didn't expect us," Elias said. A distant sound echoed from the trees, horses galloping away. The hunters were retreating to regroup, caught off guard by the resistance. Ayoka listened until the sounds faded completely. Her shoulders eased. The tension inside her chest loosened for the first time since she fled her clan. Elias placed the rifle beside the door and looked at her with a quiet, steady expression. "You did well. So did you." For a moment, neither moved. The danger wasn't gone. Not yet, but something between them had shifted. Trust, once fragile and uncertain, now held weight. Elias checked the door one more time. "Get some rest. They'll think twice before coming back." Ayoka lay down slowly, her body worn, but her spirit stronger than it had been in weeks. Elias sat in the chair near the bed, hands resting loosely on his knees, eyes fixed on the dark valley outside. The night felt less threatening now. Not because danger had disappeared, but because they had faced it side by side and survived. Dawn pushed over the valley in a slow, pale sweep, lighting the wet grass and the thin line of smoke rising from the cabin's chimney. Ayoka woke with a start, unsure at first whether the night's fight had been a dream or another memory of running. But when she saw Elias sitting in the chair near the door, rifle balanced across his lap, eyes sharp despite the long night, everything came back clearly. He glanced her way. "You slept a little." "Did you?" she asked. "Enough." Ayoka pushed herself upright, testing her ribs. The pain was there, but manageable. She stood, stretching carefully. Elias watched her without hovering. He had learned exactly how much space to give her, enough to keep her grounded, but never enough to make her feel watched or handled. Outside, the valley lay still, as if listening. Ayoka stepped to the doorframe, resting her hand on the wood. "They'll come back," she said quietly. "But not today." Elias stood and checked the rifle. "They'll need time to think." They got more resistance than they expected. A lingering question hung between them. Why the hunters had attacked in smaller pushes rather than an all-out assault. Ayoka understood that better than anyone else, and she finally spoke the truth with steady certainty. They want to capture me alive, she said. If I die, their employers get nothing. If I disappear on my own, the clans blame each other. But if they drag me back themselves, they control the story. Elias's jaw tightened. Then we make sure they never get close again. Ayoka stepped outside into the cool morning air. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and pine, a calm she hadn't felt in months. The mare inside the shed snorted softly. The cabin behind her felt solid, weathered, scarred, but dependable. She realized she had begun to rely on its strength almost as much as on Elias. "How far did they get?" she asked. Elias pointed toward the ridge. "Heard them ride off that way after your arrow and my last shot. They kept their distance after that. Because they know this valley favors you," Ayoka said. "And now it favors you too," Elias added. She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for doubt or hesitation. There was none. His steadiness wasn't bravado. It was confidence shaped by loss and responsibility. Ayoka walked a short distance, keeping her mare in view. Each step felt like reclaiming something she had lost along the trail: control, breath, purpose. She had been reacting to danger for days. Now she could finally think ahead. She ran her hand along the mare's neck. "She'll help us move faster when I'm strong enough." Elias approached. "Move where?" It wasn't a challenge, just a question he knew she had been avoiding. Ayoka looked down, fingers brushing the horse's mane. "My sister," she said softly. "If she survived, she wouldn't know where I am. She'd think I'm dead. I need to find her before the hunters or the clans do." Elias nodded slowly. "And you think they're after her too?" "If they believe she knows anything, yes." Ayoka's voice tightened. "She's younger. She wouldn't know how to run the way I did." Elias's expression darkened with protective instinct, sharp, immediate, and directed entirely at the idea of another woman being hunted. "Then when you're ready, we'll ride. We'll find her." Ayoka turned to him, her eyes holding a mix of fear, gratitude, and something deeper she hadn't named yet. "I don't want you risking your life for something that isn't yours." Elias stepped closer, not too close, just enough for her to understand the weight of his words. "Your fight is yours. Helping you is mine." Ayoka swallowed hard, feeling something in her chest loosen with relief she didn't expect. She had been alone for too long. Hearing someone say they would stand beside her, not because they had to, not because they wanted something, felt unreal. Inside the cabin, Elias prepared food while Ayoka rested with her mare nearby. The simple smell of beans simmering on the stove and wood heating in the hearth grounded the space in a way she hadn't felt since before her husband's death. After they ate, Elias fetched fresh water from the creek, while Ayoka gathered her arrows and repaired a frayed piece of the bowstring. Her hands were steady now, no tremble, no panic. Strength returning, mind clearing. When Elias came back, Ayoka met him at the door. "I want to help you today," she said. "Repair the fences. Check the ridge. Work with my hands again." "You're still healing," Elias reminded her. "I know," she replied. "But I can do something. My body needs to remember how to move without fear." He studied her posture, the set of her shoulders, the calm in her eyes, and gave a slow nod. "All right, but we take it slow." They walked the fence line together. Ayoka held the rope while Elias hammered stakes into the ground. When she felt her ribs throb, she paused and breathed until the pain eased. Elias waited each time, not rushing her, not questioning her ability. When they reached the ridge, Ayoka scanned the valley with a sharp, practiced gaze. "They'll try again," she said softly, "but not the same way." "No," Elias agreed. "They'll change tactics, and we'll be ready," she said. Her voice didn't shake. The fear in her had changed shape, no longer a threat circling inside her chest, but a reason to stand taller. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Elias and Ayoka returned to the cabin. The day had passed without violence, but not without change. She moved more freely. He watched her with quiet respect. Their bond, formed through danger and silence, had deepened into something steady and undeniable. That night, as Elias checked the shutters and Ayoka cleaned her bow, neither spoke of fear returning. The danger was still out there, but the weight of it no longer pressed down on them the same way. They were no longer reacting. They were preparing. Together. The next morning broke warmer than the last, sunlight spreading across the valley in wide, quiet bands. The storm had passed fully now, leaving the air clean and the earth settled beneath a soft breeze. Ayoka stepped outside with slow, steady breaths, feeling the warmth on her skin. Her ribs still hurt, but each movement came easier. She wasn't forcing survival anymore. She was reclaiming herself. Elias stood by the corral, checking the posts and rope knots he had reinforced the previous afternoon. He paused when he heard her approach. "You move easier today," he said. "I slept without waking," she replied, surprised by her own tone. "It's been a long time since that happened." Elias gave a faint nod, the closest he came to a smile. "That's good." Ayoka leaned against the fence, watching the valley stretch wide and open. From this angle, the land looked peaceful. No sign of hunters, no movement in the distant tree line, no dust rising from the ridges. Still, she remained alert. Safety was something she trusted slowly. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked. "At some point," Elias said honestly. "Men like that don't leave empty-handed." Ayoka appreciated that he never softened the truth. He respected her enough not to hide danger. But something else weighed on her, something she had been quietly struggling with since the night of the attack. "How long do you think we have?" she asked. "Long enough," Elias answered. "Long enough to prepare, long enough to plan, and long enough for you to decide what you want." That last part settled between them in a way neither ignored. They walked the ridge together later that morning. Ayoka kept her bow in hand, though she no longer gripped it with fear. Elias walked just behind her, watching the tree lean with a practiced eye. The view from the ridge revealed the valley fully, the cabin below, the creek winding through the grass, the open sky above it all. Ayoka stopped at the crest, breathing in deeply. "This land, it feels different today." "How so?" "Less heavy, less haunted. Maybe because you're not running anymore," Elias said. She glanced at him, absorbing the quiet weight of his words. "You think that's all it is?" "No," he replied. "I think you're stronger than what chased you." Ayoka looked away, the honesty hitting deeper than she expected. Her voice came soft. "My husband said something like that once, before the clans turned on him, before they decided peace was betrayal." Elias didn't speak. He waited, giving her room to continue if she wanted. He believed talking could fix things, she said. But no one listened. They wanted enemies, not answers. When he tried to stop the fight, they blamed him for everything that followed. And when he died, they blamed me. "That wasn't your failure," Elias said quietly. "It was theirs." Ayoka swallowed hard, steadying her breath. "I was so sure I could fix something, that I could help. And then I ran, over and over." "You survived," Elias said. "That's not the same as running." His voice was calm, firm, not comforting but grounding. She looked at him again, this time not with fear or hesitation, but with recognition. Elias carried grief differently, but he understood its weight the same way she did. They walked back toward the cabin, and Ayoka paused beside her mare. The horse nuzzled her hand, sensing her calmer heart. "When I'm strong enough," she said, "I want to search for my sister. Even if she's far, even if the clans don't want her found." Elias tightened a strap on the saddle he'd been working on. "Then we'll ride." Ayoka stared at him, almost disbelieving. "You say that as if it's simple." "It is simple," Elias replied. "Doesn't mean it'll be easy, but it's simple." Her chest tightened, not from pain this time, but from something quieter, something steady and warm. She had spent months preparing for grief, expecting loss, bracing for the worst. She hadn't expected someone to choose to stand with her. Back inside the cabin, they prepared a small meal. Ayoka helped slice dried meat despite the soreness in her ribs. Elias watched her hands move, careful, deliberate, strong. For the first time, she felt useful again, not a burden or a hunted ghost. After they ate, Ayoka stepped outside to gather herbs she recognized near the creek. Elias followed at a distance, letting her move with the confidence she was rebuilding. The wind carried the scent of water and wild mint. Ayoka knelt slowly and touched the plants, remembering how her sister used to braid them into her hair. She closed her eyes for a moment, grounding herself in the memory, not with grief this time, but with something closer to hope. "You think she's alive?" Elias asked gently. Ayoka opened her eyes. "I have to believe it. If I don't, I have nothing to carry forward. Elias nodded once. Then we search. Ayoka studied him, the quiet strength in his posture, the shadow of a man who had lost everything and somehow still found room to protect someone else. And what about you? She asked. What do you carry forward? Elias looked toward the ridge, where the last of the sunlight caught the tops of the pines. I don't know, he admitted, but helping you, it feels like something worth doing. Ayoka didn't respond, but the warmth that rose in her chest said enough. The evening came slowly, drawing long blue shadows across the land. They worked side by side, gathering firewood and repairing the shutter the hunters damaged. Ayoka's ribs ached again, but she didn't hide it. Elias noticed immediately. That's enough for today, he said. She didn't argue. Inside the cabin, the fire cast a soft glow against the walls. Ayoka sat on the edge of the bed while Elias adjusted the blankets. You're stronger every day, he said. She looked at him with tired but steady eyes. Because you gave me a place to stop running. Elias hesitated for the first time. His voice dropped. You don't owe me anything for that. I know, she replied. That's why it matters. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full, carrying everything they had survived together and everything they hadn't said yet. Outside, the valley grew dark again, but for the first time, neither of them glanced toward the ridge in fear. For the first time since they met, night brought a sense of peace. Ayoka laid down with slow, careful breaths. Elias sat in his chair near the door, rifle nearby, as always. But this time, his posture wasn't rigid. It softened slightly, as if the danger around them had shifted into something manageable, something shared. They slept lightly, but they slept without dread. Morning sunlight crept into the cabin in soft, warm bands, touching the table, the bed, and the worn timber walls with a quiet sense of calm neither of them had felt in years. Ayoka woke slowly, her ribs aching but no longer sharp, her breathing deep and steady. For the first time since she arrived, she felt strength, not just in her muscles but in her thoughts. Elias was already outside, splitting wood with a steady rhythm. The echo of each strike carried across the valley, not as a warning this time, but as the sound of life returning to a place long marked by silence. Ayoka watched him through the open door, her hand resting lightly against the frame. A strange, warm realization settled over her. She wasn't a burden here. She wasn't a ghost passing through. She belonged in this moment, strong, alive, and standing on her own feet again. When she stepped outside, Elias paused mid-swing. You're up early, he said. I slept well, she replied. Better than I expected. Elias planted the axe in the stump and wiped the sweat from his brow. Your strength's coming back. It is, Ayoka said quietly. And I know what I need to do. Elias waited, giving her space. He sensed this wasn't simply about survival anymore. Ayoka walked toward the corral, her fingers brushing the mare's mane. I want to find my sister. I need to know if she's alive or not. If she's out there, she's alone, just like I was. Elias nodded. Then we prepared a ride. Ayoka turned to him. You would come with me? Even if it takes us far from here. Elias didn't hesitate. I'm not letting you search alone. Her throat tightened, not with fear, but with relief. She had expected resistance, expected him to tell her she was strong enough now, that she didn't need him. Instead, he gave her what she truly needed, someone who understood the weight of loss and refused to let her carry it alone. She stepped closer. I thought I had no one left. You do now, Elias said, simple and sincere. They spent the next days preparing for the journey. Elias repaired saddles and checked his rifle, while Ayoka sharpened her arrows and packed the herbs she had gathered by the creek. The cabin, which once held only Elias's grief, now felt fuller, steadier, shaped by two sets of hands instead of one. During those preparations, the last unanswered questions naturally fell into place. Ayoka found her husband's small pendant tucked inside her belongings, something Elias had placed safely beside her bed the first night. He hadn't touched the rest, not even out of curiosity. The gesture confirmed what she already knew. Elias had always respected her, even when she was unconscious and helpless. As they worked, the valley remained quiet. No hunters returned. Their failed attack and the resistance they met had forced them far from the region. The land no longer felt like a trap. It felt open again. On the morning they were ready to leave, Ayoka stepped outside with her pack slung across her shoulder. Elias secured the last strap on his horse. The sky was clear, the wind gentle. Ayoka approached him, calmer than he had ever seen her. "Before we go," she said, "I want you to know something." Elias looked toward her, waiting. "You saved me," she said, "not just on the trail. In here." She touched her chest lightly. "I thought I was only what others took from me. But you showed me I'm still someone who can choose. Someone who can stand. Someone who can stay." Elias swallowed, the weight of her words settling deep. "I didn't do anything special." "You did enough," she said softly. And that changed everything. A moment of silence passed, grounded, real. Ayoka mounted her mare with a fluid motion, wincing only slightly. She was ready. Elias mounted beside her, glancing toward the distant hills. "Where do we start?" he asked. "North," she replied, "toward the river settlements. If my sister survived, that's where she would look for safety." Elias nodded. "Then north it is." They rode out of the valley side by side, moving a steady pace across the open land. The cabin shrank behind them, but did not feel abandoned. It felt like something they carried with them, its safety, its silence, its memories. As they reached higher ground, Ayoka slowed her horse and looked back at the valley one last time. Not with sorrow, not with fear, with gratitude. She turned to Elias. "When this is over, when I find her, I want to come back here." Elias met her gaze, understanding exactly what she meant. "I'll be here." Together they rode into the wide morning light. Two survivors connected by loss, strengthened by trust, moving toward a future they chose instead of one forced upon them. No hunters behind them, no fear ahead, only the open land and the promise of something new. The story closed with the quiet certainty that both of them, wounded, resilient, and no longer alone, were finally on a path not shaped by running, but by hope. A full ending. No loose threads. No unanswered questions. Just a beginning they finally earned.